Oh, hello. Good morning. This is Nyko's RPG, and today we're going to be talking about the importance of fair play. I have started this new series, Playing by the Rules, to go over some of the micro elements, perhaps, of gameplay and of play in general that may slip your mind, and to discuss how best we can share in the experience of having a good game experience or a good play experience and therefore improve our lives overall. If you are new to the channel and haven't watched before, make sure you take some time to kind of digest the things that I have to say, and whether that be in this episode or one of the other videos that I've done, I think you'll get an idea that I have dedicated myself to making the play experience you have at your table become the best it could possibly be. So we're talking about fair play in particular today, but the idea is to talk about playing by the rules. And one of the biggest challenges with playfulness is that it is a term that seems, at least on its face, to be an absolute exclusive item that each person by nature has to have or should have his own definition. But this is a challenge because play by its own very nature is a kind of an oblique term. And so let's try to focus a little bit on it. When we speak of play in particular, we're referring to an exercise of the imagination and creativity where we take into account the possibilities we have in our actual lives and find ways to practice or fine-tune those skills outside of the actual use of them. One of the things that, ironically, that's kind of interesting is that those items that are utilized in reality are those things that we truly gain experience from. In those areas where we don't do so, they tend to be trivialized and made less important because they are not explicitly a focus of our skills. And so, therefore, when I speak of the importance, I'm really talking about the relevance. Play, by its own nature, is an exercise, as I said, that occurs in the imagination, in the individual creativity, but it does not necessarily manifest in our physical life form until we see the applications of it in the practical form. With that, therefore, let's talk about what it means to be playing fair. The element of fairness has to do with equality of experience. In other words, if you and I are playing a game of checkers, for example, the set of rules are clearly defined that we move the pieces by a set of stipulated rules until such time as one person has captured all of the opponent's playing pieces. And with that simple understanding, we are both equal in the game. There's an understanding of a starting point that is equitable, that both players start with the same number of pieces in the same relative locations on the board, and that the movement of those pieces will lead to the eventual elimination or capture of their opponents. And since we have an equal number of playing pieces and an equal number of starting positions, then the game is considered to be fair. And when we speak about fair play in what is now in our culture considered to be a what's the word for it that they utilize? Asymmetric. The idea is that originally rules were always symmetric, that you have exactly the same number of playing pieces I do. We both play the exact same number of moves in effect, alternating, and therefore those are a fair set of rules. There are an increasing number of products being put out and being established as games that ignore that completely. There are board games out there that utilize the term asymmetric in reference to not all players are playing by the same rules. And to me, that's a challenge because that undermines one of the very basics of play, is that we are playing with the idea of the same set of rules, and an asymmetric system simply isn't. It's playing with varying rules by the player. So when we therefore talk about fair play, we're having to redefine what that fairness is, and I think that's problematic. So let's try to dig into this with a more practiced eye on maintaining this concept of fair play. So the question is asked, especially by the asymmetric environment, why play fair? Why have rules that establish equanimity between the players at the very beginning? Why not have it be established as a challenge that one team may have a clear or at least an inferred advantage over the other? Well, the reality is that play is supposed to be a mutually beneficial thing. We don't play in an environment where things aren't in our favor. It's no longer playful. Now it's actually an established work. And I think that we are seeing a rather insidious process of trying to destabilize the very concept of playfulness. And this video may get me into trouble because there are people who are going to look at what I'm suggesting and think that I'm saying that game designers are monstrous or villainous in some fashion. But what I'm saying is that the very ideas of what is play is being taken away from us. If you look back at the history, at least of my generation, and granted, I'm speaking purely empirically here. I'm obviously the only source of real information for this in my case. But when you are agreeing to play, you're agreeing to both or all. If you're playing a group concept, if all of the participants are on even ground to start with. And this idea of being on even ground to start with is only so that the play of the game can be competitive. It can be perhaps adversarial, perhaps less so. But the idea is that you're playing with the same sets of rules so that the amount of relative success or failure is the same. And this idea really stems from the concept, at least culturally, that we are all the same, that we are all equal in the eyes of the world, in the eyes of God, if you will, in our humanness. We are the same. And therefore, playing, when children play, they are engaging in this imaginative process and figuring out how to communicate and interact with each other, and are doing so with the idea that the other persons in the space, the other children that are around, are their fundamental equals, that they are all competing from the same framework. And this is really essential, in my estimation, to maintain the equitability of humanity. The reason why the arguments are made that there should not be racism, there should not be sexism, there should not be thisism or that-ism, really stems from the idea that we should see each other as equal. And when we are children and we are playing, that's exactly what we're doing, is we're establishing a pecking order in terms of skill at whatever particular game engine we are utilizing. And if you set that up to be unfair, if you set that up to be unbalanced or unstable, you are asking for there to be problematics in the outcome, because there are going to be those who are given certain advantages and others given certain disadvantages, and that's problematic. The point is that we should be equitable or equal. This really brings us to the conversation about one of those nearly indescribable terms that we end up being able to only explained by using other languages. And so we're going to be referring to and overcoming the concept of Schadenfreude or Schadenfreude. There are a lot of people who either mispronounce or misunderstand what this phrase means, but it refers to the joy we take when someone else suffers discomfort. And the idea is that if somebody else trips and falls, that's somehow funny to us because it didn't happen to us. Our joy comes from the fact that it was something that happened to someone else. And this is, to me, one of the most alienating portions of human endeavor, is that we poke fun or we take pleasure from other people's discomfort or pain or difficulties. And it really, I think it's elemental in our human existence that we understand that in the overall galactic scale of things, survival of the most fit, survival of the most equipped, most prepared, or whatever, is a almost intrinsic accepted fact among humanity, among all of us, because we know that survival of the most fit means that there is going to be failures by others, and therefore we can take joy in the fact that we did not suffer that setback. And the challenge with that is in some circles, actually I would argue in probably many circles, considered to be a great element of fun. And as a person who was bullied in school and picked on in school and such when I was a kid, and I argue that almost all of us have been, I think that the concept that a bully is somebody who is somehow not susceptible to being bullied is a misnomer and a challenge to our defining elements. When we say that somebody else never faced this kind of a challenge, I think there's a chicken and egg argument that can be made that every difficulty that we come upon is one that came about because of somebody else's taking advantage or taking joy at our challenges or our problems. And so the idea is that we have to find a way to overcome Schadenfreude. We have to find a way to undo the joy we take when other people suffer. And this is part of the very process of community that we see in our cultures. And I think that it's tied directly to our playfulness. And the idea of being playful is to recognize when somebody's had a difficult time, perhaps taking some Schadenfreude from it, but also taking compassion and overlaying that on the Schadenfreude and just disassembling it, or at least defanging it, so that it's just a acceptance of the part of the world that's going to happen to us eventually as well. And the very concept of playing, for example, a game like checkers or cribbage or tic-tac-toe even, is simply that we need to keep participating at it often enough so that we suffer our own blows by the method of Schadenfreude as we allow to happen to others, and allow for that balance to be visible, because we eventually see it happening to all of us, and therefore no longer holds its sway over us. I think that one of the biggest challenges of our current condition culturally is that we are watching one group take benefit of Schadenfreude over another, and it's gone back and forth before, but it's a long enough duration between swings that we see or perceive of that as being mean-spirited or callous, and the reality is that it's just part of human nature. Having said that, the idea, therefore, is that there are benefits to badminton. word Bambanum is an analog to Schadenfreude. Ironically, it's also a foreign word, Schadenfreude from German and Bambanam from Milanese. But the concept of Bambanam is the taking of pleasure from the pain of others. And that's the reason why there is a benefit to it, is that it does reinforce the idea that we want to be prepared. We want to be ready for the problems of life, because if we're more prepared, we suffer less. But the benefit of having Bambanum in your play environment is only that you can allow it to occur back and forth between sides, and now all players can experience it, so that number one, they can be aware of that element in their play mechanism, but they can also see why they need to be compassionate with others who are in that moment suffering the downside of the Bambanum. So when we take a game mechanism and we make it as fair as possible, we give each side opportunity for this failure, so that we can all experience it and therefore learn from it. I do believe that the element of play that makes us better isn't necessarily that we can overcome all of our problems and never suffer from the Bambanum, but we can mitigate, and even in certain cases ameliorate the very feelings that came from them, so that our play becomes more wholesome, in that we are simply enjoying the game, the joy of the game, whether it's the positive or the negative. Because once you've seen the concept of Schadenfreude or Bambanam from both sides, then you can sort of even laugh at it when it's the bad thing happens to you. And I think that is really the element that we need to develop in our fair play. So therefore, the idea of dealing with the Schadenfreude in a less than amicable way, when we clearly make gloating fun of the person who's suffering, is adversarial at least, and maybe damaging to our culture at best. It really comes down to this. Our culture is all about equality. When we look at the laws established for I suppose I'm speaking specifically for the United States, but the concept of equality among people, the very concept of all men are created equal, is across the board as a statement of generality for all people. It therefore does not necessarily guarantee equality in the end product. We are from different cultures, we're from different families, we're from different ideologies, we're from different philosophies. And therefore, we can only argue for the equality of opportunity. We can't argue for the equality of outcome, because there are variabilities, including, at the very least, our own personal morality and ethos and willingness to follow the rules. So when you are talking about making a game fair, you're making the equality on the opportunity for success failure, not on the guarantee of outcome. This is precisely why, for example, in the case of youth sports, having a set of rules for how the game must be played is far, far more valuable than a statement that we're not going to keep score, or we're going to provide everyone a trophy, or we're going to provide everybody a ribbon for completing. That's not for competing. That's an attempt to have an equity of outcome, and that is not helpful. Whereas having equality of opportunity is helpful. And this is why when I hear people talk about a game mechanism that has built-in asymmetry, there's, to me, problematics involved with that. And I've heard people argue that, for example, role-play games are asymmetrical because the game master and the players are all involved in the game, and therefore there's an asymmetry between the game master who knows everything and the players who know virtually nothing. But that's not the perception I'm taking. I'm taking the perception more along the lines of there are rules for how the game is played, and those rules need to be applied to both the players and the GMs. And the purpose for the equity is in having equity of opportunity in the game, not necessarily guaranteeing an equity of outcome. And I think when we talk about playing fair, it really needs to be that former rather than the second. And when we therefore look at our world today and we say people need to play more often, we need to give them opportunities to play more fairly. Alrighty, I'm at my time frame for this episode, so I want to thank you for watching. If you want to know more about what's going on in the world of Nikos, check out our broadcasts Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. Pacific time, as well as our Friday morning episodes at 10 a.m. And also, if you are interested in becoming part of our community, check out Nikos RPG. Look at patreon.com/Nikos, Nycos. Thank you again for being here, and I will see you in the next episode.